in London meeting up with people from the self-employed freelance contractor community. I thought I'd give you a rundown on the very strange situation that's happening here in the UK, which I think is going to have huge employment problems for the UK, particularly around the Brexit situation. This has been ongoing for 20 years, believe it or not, and it's really an assault by the tax authorities in the UK, the HMRC, against self-employment and really attacking them. The core of the problem, if I can explain it reasonably simply, is that they have a national employment or national insurance here in the UK, which when people put into that pool are then entitled to certain benefits, unemployment benefits and so on and so forth. And if you're employed, you have the employer takes a percentage of your salary out for national insurance. If you're self-employed, you are required to pay that as well, but at a lower rate, because you don't have the same entitlements to social welfare benefits if you're self-employed than if you're employed. On top of that, so both parties, employed and self-employed, pay the NI at different rates. Fair enough, straightforward. But what happens is that an employer also has to pay NI an additional 13.8% on employed people. If they don't, they're caught. But if they use self-employed people, freelancers and so on and so forth, they don't pay the extra NI. Why, I don't know, but that's the way it is. Now, what's happened is the HMRC, the tax authorities, have said, oh, look, we've got revenue leakage here. So instead of attacking and trying to enforce and require the employers or the engaging businesses to pay NI on the self-employed people, they've turned around and said, no, we'll attack the self-employed people themselves. There's the essence of the problem. And what they're doing is imposing double taxation on the self-employed people. Now, the result of this, as it's happened over the last 20 years, since about 2000, is that all sorts of strange schemes got going. So nefarious people from all over the place went to the self-employed people and said, look, you come and run your employment arrangements or your engagement arrangements through us, and they're these back-to-back loan type arrangements, all terribly strange. And so people got into those, and then apparently they didn't have to pay the NI insurance, and then didn't have to pay other taxes and so on and so forth. The reason this all got happening is because the HMRC was looking to double tax the self-employed people. So frankly, people are going to not put up with that and go into other schemes. Those schemes are all apparently quite legal. And the HMRC now has gone, oh, we've got revenue loss. Well, surprise, surprise. They're the people who created the problem. And people, self-employed people, have reacted as you'd expect anyone to react. Now, what's now happened is those schemes have been declared sometimes illegal, sometimes not, but the HMRC are now trying to move, or have been trying to move, to close those down. So you'd think that normally they'd go to the promoters of the schemes. No, what they've done is left the promoters of the schemes alone, the real people who have been causing tax dodging, and they've attacked again the self-employed people. Now, this is just craziness, total craziness. Now, what they then did, the HMRC have been losing in court on this consistently, because the essence of the issue is whether or not someone is an employee or self-employed, which means you have to do a common law case. The HMRC makes a decision and says, look, you're supposed to be an employee, it goes to court, and the HMRC has been losing. So what they've now done in 2017, they turned around and said, aha, we know a real trick. Because we've been losing, we're now going to require the engaging party to make the decision as whether someone's self-employed or not. And they've done that first off in the public sector. Now, it's been really quite silly, because the HMRC reckon as a result of this, they'll get more revenue, They get more revenue allegedly out of the public sector departments. The public sector departments, of course, then have higher expenses because they've got to compensate the self-employed or pay the NI tax. And in reality, it's a round robin that leads to no result. There's no increase in revenue for the government because any increase that comes through HMRC winds up in expenses at the other end. So this is sheer dumbness, really just off the end dumbness. So it's been okay while this has been happening. Now in this process, there have been people who've lost their houses, there have been high profile cases, the HMRC is being incredibly aggressive, there have been apparently 8 suicides directly related, it's proven to be related to this. It's just an unmitigated disaster. Still the HMRC rolls ahead. So now they want to roll out what they're doing with the private sector, with the public sector into the private sector. And this is where it's going to get really, really serious. It's quite clear to me in the discussions with people I've been having that the consequence of this is that the private sector is not going to put up with it because it's all too complicated, and they're going to move the business offshore. It's already happening. There are major discussions happening in major firms seeking to move operations, particularly freelancer consultancy type operations, offshore out of Britain. And this is going to hit Britain in and around the period of Brexit. The HMRC say that they've got 170,000 self-employed people targeted, and they reckon that they will catch 150,000. And the larger scheme of work, 150,000 people being screwed by the HMRC because of their stupid policies, maybe doesn't seem a lot. But I reckon it is. I reckon it's a huge number. And put this on top of the Brexit problems and what it's saying, giving a signal that it's not just Brexit that's a problem, but that the UK has got a very, very serious problem with gross incompetency being conducted by the HMRC in the United Kingdom. There are solutions to this, fairly straightforward, but it's clear that the HMRC have locked themselves into a position over 20 years from which they will not retreat. And the only way the solution can come is through Parliament. In other words, democracy has to prevail over bureaucracy. The UK has got a very serious problem. The parliamentarians, the government of the day have to address this. It's not only a situation of gross injustice because of double taxation, of confused and nonsense application of perverted policy and law by the HMRC, but this is a human tragedy and it's also an economic tragedy, and Britain is in trouble, real trouble, over this one. I'll do another posting at another time where I'll propose some of the solutions that are fairly straightforward that can be potentially looked at. Hope that helps.